Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that really wants you to search your heart right now and see what bullshit thing the music is leading you to do. I'm Christy Powell, and my co-host tonight is our returning Pied Piper of Night Flirt, adult industry expert Amberly Rothfield.
Thank you. Pied Piper of Night Flirt. I love that introduction. Thank you, Christy.
Do what we can, do what we can. And joining us tonight is a activist and Black non-believer, as well as a former worship minister. Welcome, Ro.
Right, Christy, I could just go ahead and...
Yeah, looks like we're having some connectivity issues. You hearing me there, buddy?
I hear you.
Cool, cool.
Good.
All right. Yeah, no, thanks so much for being here. Give us that introduction again, if you would.
I thought I had stunned everybody. They were like, don't talk.
I mean, you are that beautiful. I'm just saying.
Thank you. I am, so my name is Rogier. You all can call me Ro. That's like the only nickname that I'm really cool with. So a lot of people call me Ro, and that's fine. Or you want to call me Rogier, either is fine. I am, there's so many things I could talk about. I'll first just start by saying I'm originally from the Virgin Islands, and I'm happy to know that one of our Virgin Islanders is also listening and watching right now. We were just talking about him. Hey, Ricky. And we are both in territory of the United States, and I moved when I was a kid. My folks upped and moved when I was about 9 years old. So I'm technically like a little bit, I'm bi. It's my first experience being bi because it's a bicultural experience when you are Caribbean American to immigrate to the country and to learn how to just assimilate and all of the things that immigrants go through when they come to the United States. And so I have, from the very beginnings, that experience, which has kind of shaped and colored my whole life. And grew up the rest of the way in the States and moved around and been a lot of different places. I'm an artist, a musician, a songwriter, singer-songwriter, recording artist. And I also started to play for churches pretty early on. I would say starting from around 13 years old, I started to play in churches. And I apologize for that noise. It just stopped. I started playing for churches as an organist, pianist first, and then organ, and then later on started to sing. Singing for me was very late, but all that to say that from that age, at some point or in some way, I was always playing for churches and choirs and so forth. And in college, I went to school in Boston at a music school called Berklee College of Music. And one of the ways that I supported myself through those years was playing as a minister of music in church and teaching choirs and singing and playing and all those things at the same time. And even though my career has taken me many, many different directions, and I've had some really incredible opportunities, and I've had a chance to basically travel for free most of my life, I always played for churches when I was home and when I was off the road, so they say. And so being a minister of music was concurrent with my other career opportunities. And in that time, basically from college years to literally just a couple of years ago, right before the pandemic, I was playing for church in some way or another. And that was a whole lifetime of experience and a lifetime of experience in not only the denomination that I was raised in, which is Moravian, but also gaining experience in how other denominations run, essentially. And so I played in basically at least 10 different denominations, Protestant denominations, and one Catholic denomination, and then one Reformed Catholic denomination. So I played in a lot of different types of churches. I've had a lot of exposure to different theologies, different church communities and fellowships, and I've had a front row seat in the worship arts, as they say. In fact, you can actually go to college if you are in ministry. You can go to college. Many colleges and seminaries offer worship arts degrees. It's actually a thing, especially as churches in the last 25 years or so have really, really become these big conglomerate sort of arena stage type productions. To be a worship arts minister requires a certain kind of skill, and so a lot of those churches want to make sure that you are qualified and you're not just passionate, but that you actually have an understanding of the sort of structures of production and the way these churches run. So I don't have that, which I'm glad that I don't, but I did have, like I said, a good 20 something years of experience playing and singing and ministering. And my conversion or deconversion happened during my time as a minister of music for both an SDA church, a Seventh-day Adventist church, and then also a Baptist church, a Black Baptist church in New York, where I was living. I lived in New York for 12 years. And during that time, I basically fell out of faith. And uh, I should say maybe just the shorter story is, um, I started out just wanting to just basically kind of strengthen my understanding and my spirituality. I also was starting to come into my own sexuality as a queer Black man and figuring out what that means and really trying for once and for all to just figure out how contextually to sort of exist in a Christian spiritual framework as someone who knows and who had reconciled that they were not straight. And so that was really the beginning of that path. And I'd always had various I'd been introduced to skepticism. That's another story I can talk about. But needless to say, I started through that path of just understanding my sexuality. And then that also led into textual criticism and just kind of reading a little bit about what biblical scholars had to say on various issues. And then I started to have my own other friendship issues and so forth. And all of that at some point just came together. And one day I was just like, I'm just not a Christian anymore, and then I'm an agnostic. And then one day I woke up and I was like, you know what? I've been an agnostic for a while. I'm still an agnostic, but I think it's okay to say I just don't believe this, which would mean that I'm an atheist. And so that was about 2011-ish, which also coincided with some really prominent and heavy preaching around issues of sexuality in New York, where I was. If you remember 2011, those were the years of particularly the New York State gay marriage debates. And we were still in a state by state kind of, progression of gay marriage legalization around 2011 and 12. And so, this is before Obergefell and all that kind of stuff. And so these issues were really big in New York, as well as around the country. And they were also really, really big in churches. And having played in all these churches, not just in 2012, but in 2005 during the Bush administration and his reelection and so forth, and Dome and all of those kinds of things, they had always been in the church, but especially around 2011, it was go time. Like it was like everybody all hands on deck. We've got to beat this gay marriage thing down. And so you couldn't ignore having an opinion on these matters. And so I was literally, in churches hearing people who in some ways were just as close as family, people who in some ways leaned on for just fellowship and support, people who I worked with because I'm teaching these people music and I'm producing service for them essentially. And just all of these intimate experiences with people who really did feel like family, and some of them still are. I mean, I still keep up with a couple of people to this day. We text each other, we've texted each other throughout the pandemic, tried to make sure everybody's still alive, and just generally keeping tabs with one another. And so those relationships were strong then, and like I said, some of them are still strong. And to see how the duality of their opinions and their positions were on queer people, uh, particularly knowing that I myself was a part of that, even though they didn't know it, and even though I was still kind of figuring my way, it was really disappointing and very revealing. And got some other stories I could tell you, so maybe we'll talk about that later. But yeah, that was a big thing. And I went to grad school, moved out of the country, came back. I stopped playing for church, but I came back in 2015, and someone asked me to cover for them, and that turned into another 2-3 years of playing in another church. So I was, even as an atheist, and especially as an atheist activist, which is what I am, atheist activist, writer, and organizer. I work with Black Nonbelievers of DC. Everybody knows Black Nonbelievers. And I
big shout out.
Big shout out to them. And I've been the point person, the director for the DC affiliate for the last 3.5 or 4 years. And believe it or not, in those 3.5 or 4 years, I was still playing for church, even though I was very much an out atheist and an organizing atheist. So, the pandemic, I had tried to stop, like I said, and then it came back in my lap. And then right before the pandemic, I finally was like, all right, we got to clear this out, So so that's just a little bit about me. But I generally like to think of myself and describe myself as an artivist. I'm an artist and an activist.
I love that term.
I didn't invent it, but I appropriate it.
I'm going to pretend you did. I love that. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, it's a great way to condense all of the things that I just babbled out.
Artivist, I love it. So yeah, no, like I actually had some similar experiences in my growing up in a church and everything. I caught myself going yes as going along. And like you were saying, music was a huge thing. I was in many different churches at different points of time because I'm biracial and like divergent, different belief systems. And then I also am a bit of a rebel. So I was like, screw you guys, I'm going to go test something else. But I remember having this like religious experience where if I look back on it now, after listening to Dr. Christy a lot, I realize now it was just because love you. There was a lot of people around. We were all saying the same things, and it was live music, which prior to this, we all go to church and there's live music, right? Like the choir.
Yeah.
But this time it was like out in open space. There was more than just the really shitty organ player. Bless her heart. It was nice, but it was bad.
Who would you have? Sister Agnes?
Sister Agnes on the organ. It was not. It was not. It was not the tea. But we had like other church groups there too, and they were playing drums. And I remember having what felt like a religious experience. I was like, this is God. This is God. I know the Jeebus loves me now. And then like, it was like a couple months after that, I was like, I don't know if that was the God. And then Christy made me think it was not God. Thanks, Christy. Thanks for explaining that for me.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the reasons I was so excited when we first had the opportunity to speak to a hypnotist on this show, because there was just so much about my experience that even after I could no longer justify my belief in my faith and my belief in God and these different things, there were experiences that I had that I did not know how to explain. And so a exploration of psychology and then eventually, altered states and phenomenology and all of these kinds of things, that was really for me the death nail, I suppose, in the coffin of my faith. Because we're going to get into it a little bit, but there are a lot of sort of tools and tricks, whether they are used sincerely by people who are really trying to tap into the divine, or whether they're used in like a knowing way there's a certain level of manipulation that's going on, and I think a lot of folks might be surprised to recognize that, you know, when you are standing in a hot room for hours listening to repetitive music over and over again about
No
how
food.
great God is while waving your arms up and down, that, you know, that might have some impact on your psychology. That might have some impact on your experience of the room and your experience of God or the spirit, or
Yeah.
however you want to frame that. But
and there's no food. There's no food. Like, you
yeah.
cannot go that long with no food. But if you guys have anything that anyone listening to the audience, you want to call in and tell us your experience, if they're similar or divergent, we would love to hear them. I forget. Oh yeah, the phone number is 512-991-9241, and I didn't read it off the screen. I read it off the screen.
Yeah, well, we hope that that folks will call in and just let us know. That number again is 512-991-9242. We'd love to hear from you and hear your experiences. But Ro, I can't even conceive of what it must have been like to be grappling with your sexuality, to be grappling with your faith, and to be experiencing so many different types of churches and so many different ways that it's being presented. Just because, you know, I grew up in a really small town, and it was like, this is God. And also maybe the Catholics down the street are kind of close, but they're not actually Christians. We're the only true Christians because, you know, we as evangelicals, we're the only ones with like a real connection to God. And I can only imagine what it must have been like for you to see behind the curtain in so many different places, and to see how the sausage was made in that way. I mean, what can you tell us about your experiences? I guess sort of like peering behind the veneer of the church in that way.
You distracted me with the sausage because I didn't have any sausage.
You too?
Yeah. There was no
sausage
for such a long time.
I get that a lot too.
I'm joking halfway. I would say that you know, there's a great podcast. I'm a total podcast junkie.
Yeah.
And one of the podcasts, actually, that's a big part of how I became an atheist, is by listening to like copious amounts of podcast listening. And there's one that I like now that's called Still Processing, and it's a great title, right? It's a great podcast, but it's also a great title, and I wish I could have thought of it, because it's something that I would like to use, you know, one of these days when I make my own. But Still Processing is what I am doing even right now, for all of those experiences and all of those years that you were talking about and that I was going through, in describing my experience. You know, being up close and personal in the church world was, it was such a natural thing. And there were also so many other things that came naturally with it, you know, just the cultural messaging is so strong, and especially for someone like me, I'm talking a lot about, you know, years that were late 90s into, you know, like I said, up until at least 2010, 11. And so this is I wouldn't say pre-internet, but it was you know, ubiquitous sort of internet and
smartphones
all that.
And the social media explosion, all that.
Yeah, and so you know, one of the things about being, you know, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and anyone and anything in between, is that particularly for people of my age and my generation, is the amount of isolation that we experienced, particularly in those years, is something to still process. And there are things about, you know, living without, you know, all of these text messages and you know, phones and accessibility that are great. You know, like I often daydream about like not, you know, paying attention to texts and stuff. And then at the same time, you know, as someone who, like I said, is queer identified, you know, I think about those years and the kinds of experiences of isolation and and loneliness, but not even knowing that you're lonely, and just kind of not really understanding why you're being shaped in certain ways by people and community and attitudes around you that you don't even understand yourself. Those are the types of things that I'm still processing. And they're the
Sure.
types of things that I am, anytime I get nostalgia for those years, I always kind of I just wince a little bit. Like I don't always get fully into that nostalgia because it's like I don't want to go back to that. I don't want to go back to, those places of being in community and thinking that you're in community, and then you hear people agree with some of the most vile language and
Sure.
stereotypes and sort of dehumanizing sort of ideas about people like you. And for someone like me, it's weird. Like you know I don't think that if I were to tell you my past history in terms of childhood, growing up, school years, and trauma and stuff like that, um, I would say that I absolutely did not pass for straight.
Mm.
But at the same time, there's something about me that does pass in certain spaces.
Plus, there's
And
just a lot of people not wanting to actually acknowledge it.
that,
I don't want to speak for
that,
you or your experience, but I know
yeah.
that everybody around me was more than happy to make jokes about it, like in the locker room, or hassle me about it in these different ways. But when it came time to like actually discuss openly and honestly who we were,
Mhm.
everybody was suddenly blind to it. Nobody wanted
Yeah.
to acknowledge this thing that everyone knew.
Hmm. Absolutely. Um, yeah, like ditto. Absolutely. You know, I'm maybe losing my train of thought, but I think what I was trying to say was that there was a weird dichotomy for me in terms of my experience as being a, you know, emergent, non-straight queer person, because I could sort of traverse in these spaces where, like, because of that don't ask, don't tell kind of attitude,
Hmm.
um, I passed, but also because there was something apparently sufficiently masculine about my presentation that made people feel comfortable with believing that I was straight, while there was always some contingent of people in any given space who probably would have been a little curious, like, I don't know about him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I've never
So
heard anybody put it quite that way, but yeah, I do hear that. I do
you,
get that.
you know what I mean?
I
Like,
don't. Oh, sorry.
no, 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 go ahead.
I don't. It's particularly. So I was raised predominantly by my Black father. My mom left at a very early age,
Mhm.
and my Black family, like when it came to, I don't know if some of them still know whether or not my sexuality, my pronouns. I don't. I'm actually pretty sure some of them don't know my wife is trans.
Mhm.
But there's such a pressure on A to be, I mean, most Black families I know are very religious.
Mhm.
Our majority of the family is exceptionally religious. But
Mhm.
when it comes to talking about sexuality and pronouns and preferences and stuff, they are willing to go to great lengths to deny the
Mhm.
fact that you
Hmm.
are any kind of queer. You could, I love you to death, Ro. We both know you could have been just doing this all day. You
Mhm.
could have been sashaying. You could have been
Mhm.
wearing really long dresses, is what they would call them. They wouldn't call them shirts. No, it's just a really, sorry, it's a really long shirt. It's not a dress. They wouldn't call it a dress. You could have been wearing pink all day, but
Mhm.
until you said, I am gay,
Mhm.
most Black families will be like, no, no, he's straight.
Yeah.
He's a little weird. He just likes
Yeah.
attention.
Yeah.
I don't know. At
Yeah.
least that's majority of my experience, and also my like extended family, and also a bunch of my friends say the same thing. So
Yeah.
it's like this denial thing in our culture.
I had
Well,
that
Um,
it
same
makes me
experience.
curious.
what's it?
Yeah,
Oh,
I guess.
sorry.
Well, I guess I just wanted to jump in and ask what that must have felt like as somebody who's like leading worship. You know, that kind of being behind the curtain in a lot of ways, or in the closet, or however we want to frame that. I mean, I don't know if this was an evangelical thing, but there was a lot of conversation around me growing up about how the worship leaders really needed to be right with God. And if you could walk into a church and hear the worship music, but the Spirit of the Lord wasn't moving in that room, then it must be because there was like some sin, particularly on the part of the people leading the band, or things like that. And so I just wonder about that kind of double duty and having to perform under those conditions. I mean, like I know when Jagger gets up on stage and sings about satisfaction, like he's not feeling it in the same way 40 years later. But even with that level of showmanship, I guess I'm just really curious about that internal struggle.
You know, as there's so many things that I was making mental notes while you were speaking. I hope
Sorry about that. I don't mean to go on.
No, I hope I can remember them and circle back to them. But there are, on one aspect, as performers, as artists, your job is to create and recreate, right?
Sure.
Like that's your job, right? That's whether you accept it or consider it to be a job, or whether it's just something you just know how to do as an innate sort of attribute. That's what we do. We are artists. I could sing a gospel song right here, right now, and I could make it as real as it ever was for me or for you now or back when you were still a believer, because that's what I'm good at, right? Like I can do that, It's why I was able to do that and be an atheist and fool congregations, and they would literally think I was filled with the Holy Ghost. They would think that I was a conduit from God himself that was giving them a message of confirmation and consolation and affirmation. And they really, really thought it. And they had no idea, like I'm completely turned, right? Like I'm an atheist, it's not even like, now I can have a compartment where I can appreciate aspects of belief and service. But in terms of my actual, do I believe right now? Like, what's my answer? No, I don't believe. And yet, like, I could be a part of a service where I could literally set the table for you to worship, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's what I do. I'm an artist, So in some ways, that dynamic that so many of us, and particularly us as queer people do, we're good at, number one, because we're artists, right? And then we're also good at it.
We're used to masking, used to being on stage or performing kind of at all times in a lot of ways.
And that's what I was about to say, like us being not only artists, but then also queer, like we are doubly gifted. And it's no wonder why so many of us are not straight to begin with, because I was
about to say that. Yeah. Most people in entertainment are some kind of queer. And I think it's because we grow up hiding so much of ourselves. Like my dad knew, he was like, wow, you never talk about boys, do you? You're not, he's like, you don't have any crushes at school. I'm like, this girl is so, and he was like, girl, so she's like a friend of yours. And I'm like, I hope she will be. But yeah, like we're so good at hiding. Like, again, even in the adult industry, most people I know are like, I look at queerness as like, we're on the rainbow. We're on the rainbow somewhere.
We learn how to perform, from a very, very early age, and we don't even know it most of the time. So for those of us who end up being actually in the arts and employed and sort of a part of this craft, we're really good at doing what we need to do to make the moment. And there's a weird sort of relationship between audiences and congregations and the performer, because everybody's sort of engaged in a mutual sort of act of disbelief. And so there's a certain thing, like when you go to a movie theater, you go to sit down and watch, whatever, Lord of the Rings, or
you're kind of leaning into it, like letting it impact you.
Like you know that it's not real, but you're sitting down and you're going to surrender yourself to the experience for the benefit of whatever the imagination can conjure or can be affected by what you see on the screen. And that's the relationship that you have when you sit down in the seat. You're going to be entertained. You're going to let go and let this experience sort of take you where the performer wants to take you. And so in church, it's no different. It's the same thing. And it's also one of the reasons why so many people who are queer, Donnie McClurkin and so many other gospel performers and artists, not to single him out, but I mean, you can name them, going back to Thomas Whitfield and, so many different people. They are a part of something that is a performance by nature, just by virtue of the performance, the act of the performance.
Mm-hmm.
And then also with the social pressure and conditioning and hierarchy, they have to play that role because they can't come out because the audience doesn't want them to come out, which is the reason why those people that I mentioned, the Don McClurkins and the Thomas Whitfields and the what's the other one with the deep voice? You all know, the gospel people know who I'm talking about. But these legendary performers, and they're not all men. There's so many in gospel music that are women as well, and they actually have a better cloak, shall we say, because people expect the choir directors, the male choir directors, people expect them to be gay, but meanwhile the women kind of skirt off on the side because people aren't looking at them; they're looking at the men because
they're looking at Kirk Franklin.
They're looking at Kirk Franklin and so forth. There's a sort of a contemptuous expectation, I should say, that they be homosexual, shall we say. It's an expectation, but it's also a contempt for the expectation.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I hear that.
And then if it's confirmed, should anyone ever come out, then it's like, oh well, we kind of that it makes sense. Speaking of gospel music, and I'm not a gospel artist, although I've spent a lot of time in church. There's a great case study in an artist named Tone. I don't know if you all know Tone. Do you all know him?
I do not.
He goes by B. Slade now. He's a fabulous artist, fabulous singer. He famously came out maybe 8 years ago now, somewhere around the same time I was, coming out and so forth. And I mentioned 2011 or 12. He had been a Stellar Award, Grammy Award winning gospel artist, mainstream. He had this song called Lord Make Me Over. And you might have heard it. It goes, Lord, make me over.
I know that
Lord,
song.
make me over. Right. So that's his song, right? Won a Grammy and everything. He comes from a very, very heavily church family, bishop out of, I think, Oakland or San Francisco, famous sort of black church people. I want to say they may be Kojic, but I'm not sure. And he's a great case study because he is exactly what I'm talking about. He is the artist that people had contempt for and also expected would be gay, but also kind of like played that game of he's not really gay because he didn't say it, and I don't want to believe that he would be. So he's exactly that. Like he's a great
gospel Clay Aiken.
Yes, he's a gospel Clay Aiken. Or a gospel Little Richard, like literally,
sure, yeah,
like just like Little Richard to his almost dying day was like, I'm not gay, he had moments where he was like,
I kept waiting for him to give it up.
No.
But then again, I also question because he never even though he lived to a point where he could have. I was like, well, maybe this is just his shtick for attention,
that word could is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, though, right? Like, how do you come out at 70 and 80 years old and these things? I mean,
and it made me sad too because it was like you could see in his. I think at one point he did kind of come out, but then there was an interview that he gave, within the last 10 years or so of his life, where he was asked point blank, and he was like, "Oh no," he had kind of renounced that, and then to your question, it was very sad because it was what I saw was someone who was in his late 70s who came from a time in American history where that just was not available to him, like on a neurological level, he could not
build.
Would you say?
Yeah. It could have got him killed.
It could have gotten
Yeah.
killed.
Mhm.
And so, you hear somebody kind of denying the obvious, but then, you think about what he had seen in his lifetime, as a Black, flamboyant, like innovator of rock and roll music, coming out of a gospel tradition, like literally handing rock and roll over to those who would take it and make it their own, and living through segregation, all these different things. And it's just kind of like, well, can you blame him? It's kind of like,
Yeah. No,
you
fair to
know,
say.
No, absolutely. No, I have no contempt for him not, because
yeah,
that's
yeah,
on him if he wants to.
yeah,
But yeah, I remember thinking, I was like, you're past, we all feel like we kind of know, though at the end of the day, it's none of our business. You're
right,
past the age of touring.
yeah,
I can't say that word.
yeah,
But you're not going to lose your fan base. You're not going to lose any potential deals now.
right.
If he were to come out, that would have been a very powerful moment in LGBTQ history.
It just goes to show
yeah.
how difficult and how locked up these ideas can leave all of our minds.
Yeah.
And I mean, Queen Latifah only recently came out like 2 or 3
we
weeks
all
ago.
knew.
Yeah, fair
And we
to
all
say.
knew. The streets all knew
We
forever.
knew.
Yeah.
We knew. And we
Yeah.
loved her anyway. Like, it's like, oh, come on, sister, But that's just what not only homophobia in our culture can do, but specifically in the industry, in the music industry, can do to a person.
Exactly.
And
Which is what blows my mind, because most producers, I'm so sorry. Most producers, most songwriters, most musicians, we are all, not all, we are I swear it has to be 92% or more are on the rainbow somewhere. And for us to not be able to come out is just it. Again, I'm not trying to force anyone out of the closet they are not ready to walk out of, because I understand.
Right.
I came out of many. I came out with my wife being trans. I came out of the closet myself. I came out as being a sex worker. Trust me, I don't want to pull anybody out. But yeah, it just shows you how difficult it is for us. We are surrounded by literally people who are like us, people who know our secrets. That's how we knew Queen Latifah was lesbian, because the streets were talking.
Yeah.
But yet we still can't come out. So
yeah, it's also it's a misconception that the music industry, to date at least, has been so wide open for queer people to come out. And what I always say is that it's open for people if you want a makeup artist, if you're the stylist, yes, if you're working at the agency, you're at the label, you're taking tickets, you're doing blogging or whatever, video stuff to talk about, entertainment news. Yes, for those people, yes, there's a lot more room for those people to live openly and to work openly in that space. But to be at the center, in the front of the stage, to be the boss, the person that is the sort of the main act, that's still incredibly limited space. And
I remember even when Lil Nas X came out, and there were all these headlines about it.
You stole that from me.
I mean, he was really quick to say oh, did y'all not know? I mean, just this whole notion of coming out and the expectation, obligation. Yeah, there's a value to it.
There's still people that say, oh, he's just lying. He's just saying that for attention.
Yeah, sure.
I was like, does he need to make an OnlyFans and bust it out for everybody for us to believe
gay
him?
Do you have to be before people accept that you're gay? When you are grinding Satan's bones, are you not? Is that not gay enough? I don't know. I thought it was sufficiently gay. I enjoyed it quite a lot. No, so I really want to get into this conversation about music and about sort of its influence and its power and some of the machinations of that. But before we do, I want to make sure to jump on the phones and see who we've got.